You've got a great idea for a small business, but you just can't get it off the ground. You want to be your own boss, set your own hours. Well, new year means new opportunities, and Shopify's got you covered to help get your venture off the ground. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. You can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. And they help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard. Don't kick yourself next holiday season when your 2025 resolution list looks the same as it does today. Make it happen with Shopify. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/income.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
That's when I looked up to the kid and immediately felt like the world turned upside down. It's like a panic attack was taking over me. Nothing felt real.
My heart was beating out of my chest, and that feeling of dread returned.
It was at that moment I started to think that no one would help me or even hear me at all.
From Killer Podcasts, true tales of horror, bizarre happenings, unexplainable events. This is Disturbed. Hello, and welcome back to the show. This week, we're bringing you 5 stories that will fill you with dread. So sit back, listen closely, and dive into the horror. First, a story narrated by Kat Carter from Reddit user Haven Hale. I thought I was waiting at the bus stop, but it ended up being a white van stop instead.
This happened to me in the early 80s when I was about 14 or 15 years old. I lived on a quiet street in the suburbs of my city, in a small place you wouldn't quite call the countryside, but close. It was known locally back then that little girls started disappearing more often, but it wasn't yet a topic of conversation among the towns and neighborhoods. Most of my friends lived in the city, so I would often take the bus to go meet them. One day, at around 5 or 6 p.m., I started walking to the bus stop since I was going to meet my friend that evening. The bus stop wasn't that far from my house, maybe a half mile. There were usually few cars or people around, but I had taken this route so many times that I didn't really think anything of it. When I got to the bus stop, the street was dead. No cars or people to be seen. I'd been standing there for a few minutes, waiting for the bus, when a white van slowly approached my direction and started slowing down right next to the bus stop. I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just parking or looking for something. But then 2 men got out and started walking towards me. One of them looked average enough, but the other man caught my attention because his face had one hollow eye socket where his left eye should have been. His other eye locked onto mine, and the intensity of his gaze made me freeze on the spot. Before I could even process what was happening, they had a hold of me. One grabbed my arm with a grip so tight it felt like my bones were gonna snap, and the other wrapped his arm around my waist, dragging me towards the van. Neither of them said a word, although, to be honest, their silence was worse than anything they could have said. I started screaming and kicking as hard as I could, but there was literally nobody I could see around. I remember I even started yelling, "Fire, fire," since my mom had told me it was a code for people who were getting abducted. It was a really horrible feeling, being pulled closer to the van, knowing I couldn't do anything to avoid it. They shoved me into the van, and as I landed on the floor, I saw a Doberman and a third man with a bandana covering his face who was staring at me with a disgusting, creepy face that still haunts me to this day. It was at that moment I started to think that no one would help me or even hear me at all. I kept struggling and fighting back and kind of managed to get them off of me for a second, but they kept grabbing me and pulling me back in. I remember this distinctive metallic smell inside the van, like rust or maybe blood. I felt like the luckiest person on earth when, out of nowhere, my older brother showed up. He didn't live with us at the time, so coincidentally he was probably visiting us that day. I don't really remember why he was there. He started yelling and throwing punches at the men. In the struggle, they let go of me, and I managed to pull myself free and back away. The men seemed to be caught off guard. After a few seconds of fighting, they ran back to their van, slammed the doors, and sped off. Immediately, we ran home. I started crying in distress. The walk home was hard, since my legs were shaking nonstop. I felt overwhelmed and couldn't really process what just happened to me. People who have experienced something similar to this know how shocked and paranoid you start feeling after this. We reported it to the police later that night, but they didn't do much. Things like this weren't taken very seriously back then in the area we lived in. Just telling this story makes me start shaking, even to this day. I'm so grateful that my brother was there to save me, just in the nick of time.
Our next story is a voicemail sent in by listener Drew. Who could have guessed that staying in a cabin in the woods might not turn out well? If you'd like to send us a voicemail, go to hotline.disturbedpodcast.com, and you just might hear your voice on the show.
Hey everyone, I just want to say I listen to the podcast almost every single day. I listen to it at work. It's amazing. It always gives me chills. But there's a story that I just wanted to tell. So, me and my family, when I was about, I guess I'd say 13, 14, we went to this cabin in Wyoming. It had two houses, so it had a bigger house that my parents were staying in, and it also had this rentable kind of garage made into a house, kind of small thing. It was meant for kids. There was bunk beds in it, so me and my brother obviously took that because we're not going to pass up that opportunity. While we were there, it was really beautiful during the day. There was never really any issues other than when it became dark. When it was nighttime, we started hearing ticking, kind of like tree branches on the front door. And then we started hearing just noises that were kind of inhuman, kind of hard to explain. Just sounded like rustling right outside the door. Sounded like leaves banging, or I guess rustling against the building. So when I was younger, obviously I had no idea about the actual layout of the building because I'm more focused on the inside, picking my room and stuff. So after the first night and this happened, I walked outside and checked the whole surrounding of the building that me and my brother were in, and there was not one tree. If you've ever been in Wyoming and you're actually up on the mountain, which is where we were, there's thin trees. The trees have leaves or more like pine needles up towards the top of the tree. So down below was kind of unfamiliar to everyone, and the clicking at the door didn't make sense. So from that point on, it kept happening. Every single night, I heard that at the door, and you just kind of felt like someone was watching you. Like there was this presence in there. It never felt normal to us, and it really creeped me out. So I talked about my experience to my mom recently, and she ended up telling me her experience at that house. She reminded me that I went up to her and my father bunch of times, at least a handful of times, telling them how uncomfortable I felt and how I just always felt like there was something off. And my mom at the time didn't want to freak me out, so she never told me, but she was getting nightmares. So she got these really bad nightmares, which she's not common to have, and it was about these two men right outside the cabin that we were at, and they were in a shooting. It was just this really vivid dream where it was just these two men shooting each other. She could see their clothing, she could see their outfits, their whole body posture and everything. And it was just really uncommon for her because she never has bad dreams. Every morning she would wake up, she would go out and drink some coffee, and while she was sitting outside, hummingbirds would swarm her, which is uncommon for hummingbirds. They never swarm people, and they never like to come close to people, but they were always all over her, multiple hummingbirds. And I guess a little background with that made it really odd was my grandma, who was her mother, was always this real big hummingbird fanatic, and she told my mom that if she ever did come back, which I don't believe in this stuff, but if she ever did come back or try to warn her of something, she would be a version of a hummingbird. And so that really stressed my mom out. She really felt like there was something off after this point. And my dad said he couldn't even sleep at night because he always felt like there was someone watching him. I don't believe in the paranormal, but eventually this situation really scared me. So we were looking all over for this bag when we were packing up to leave. We always brought that bag on every vacation. It just had a lot of toiletries, everything that we needed. When we are packing up, everything's gone. The bag just had no trace of it. There was a few items that were missing because they were supposed to be in the bag, but other than that, the bag just had no trace of being with us. So obviously me and my brother got the short end of the stick on that, and we kind of called it and went home. It was about 2 months later, out of nowhere. We've used this cupboard in those 2 months, but out of nowhere, the bag just showed up. Everything that we were missing was in it, and it was just in our cupboard that we had already been using. So that was just a kind of eye-opener on why we do not need to go back and why we shouldn't be going back. My mom told me this later on, that she actually was just outside drinking a coffee, and then the neighbors walked by. And my mom was like, oh, hey guys, just trying to make small talk. And she asked them about this kind of weird kind of aura around this house. And the neighbors told her the history of it. There was these two men, neighbors, and the one man lived at this house. They ended up believing that the mountain wasn't big enough for the two of them, and they went off in a shooting, just like the one my mom had dreamed about, and the guy that died was the guy that lived in our place that we were renting. I don't know, it was just really creepy. I've never experienced anything like that again because we went to the same mountain, and the house that we rented was actually in the front. Like, the house that we had previously rented, the haunted one, was in the backyard of our new rental. And we never felt any weird presence. We always had an amazing time there. So it was just really odd to me. I would never go back. I've never felt anything like that before, and that situation just kind of ruined a lot of vacations for me. So I just thought I wanted to add that and thought I should give that out to the people. All right. Thank you. I love your podcast.
You're listening to Disturbed. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. This next story comes from Reddit user ComfyDW and is narrated by Adam Alderson. This isn't deja vu. It's something much more surreal.
When I was 19 years old, I used to go for runs down this long road in northeast Tennessee. It was pretty open with only fields on the side and barely any houses. I'd run this same route every single day as I was really training hard before joining the Army. One day, I planned on taking the day off from running, but I had this weird feeling of motivation to go on a run that was sitting with me nearly all day. So around 3 p.m., I decided to go on a run after all. This was a lot later than my normal runs, which were usually between 6 and 8 a.m. I was about 3 miles into my run when I looked down at my phone to change the song, and out of nowhere, I ran into someone, knocking him over. The man was the same height as me with a long beard and a pretty large stature. I helped him up from the ground and said, "My bad, sir, I didn't see anyone else around." He said, "All good," then looked at me and his face instantly changed. It looked like he'd seen a ghost. I've never seen fear like this in someone before. His mouth hung open in shock and his eyes were wide, staring at me. He stuck his hand out and I didn't know what he was doing, so I just said, "Take care, sorry again." Fast forward 10 years to this past fall. I've been in the Army now for 6 years. I have a religious exemption to grow my beard, and I've been lifting weights a lot more. Holiday block leave came around, and I got the feeling that I really should go back home to visit my family. I hadn't gone back home since 2019 because flying out of Hawaii was just way too expensive, and back then I was a poor private. Now I'm stationed closer to home as a sergeant with some money. I flew into East Tennessee and stayed at a hotel. On my third day there, it was really nice out and the fall air smelled nostalgic. I kept thinking about the house I lived in with my parents about 30 minutes away, which my mom's ex-boyfriend still lives in. Around noon, I had lunch and decided to go visit, see how he and his kids were doing all these years later. I sat and talked with them all for a while, and we drank a couple beers together. I then decided I wanted to go check out my old running route. I told him I was going to take a walk as it was nostalgic, and I feel that route did very well to prepare me for my future Army career as a young adult. As I walked, I relished the silence, the slight breeze, and the beautiful fields surrounding me. All of a sudden, I got tackled out of nowhere. There'd been no one in sight as far as I had known. I heard a voice say, "My bad, sir, I didn't see anyone else around here." I was looking at the ground for my phone, which had fallen out of my hand, and I said, "All good." That's when I looked up to the kid and immediately felt like the world turned upside down. It's like a panic attack was taking over me. Nothing felt real. This kid I'd bumped into. It was literally me. I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone so dry I couldn't say anything. I reached out weirdly, just wanting to touch my younger self to make sure I was real. He looked at my hand, smiled, and said, "Take care, sorry again." Put his headphones back in and took off running. I stood there for 3 seconds trying to piece my brain back together, then yelled, "Joe, come back!" Went running to catch up with him. But I never saw him again. He'd vanished from the open road. This has been sitting with me ever since, like some weird dream. I can't get over it.
Our next story is narrated by Cesar Brasil. I don't believe your lies for a second.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Well, hey, podcast listener. My name is Vince, and I'm the host of a show called The RR Show. It stands for Reddit Readings. We're going to sit down twice a week, and I'm going to bring you the most entertaining stories from all of the best subreddits that exist online. Things like malicious compliance, petty revenge, hey, lady, I don't work here. Oh, there's so much more. Lots of great stories and things you won't believe. Like the one time this dude was caught in a bathroom with his friend, and he was slapping them because that was the only way that he could actually legitimately help them. A mall cop comes in with a taser. Oh, yeah, the rest is history. It's going to be fun. There's, I don't know, I got like 20 seconds left, so I don't got much more time to tell you another story. But just join me on The RR Show. It's from Evergreen Podcast, produced in partnership with Wessler Media. So The RR Show, wherever you get podcasts, subscribe today. And it's like an adult story time. Let's hang out together. The RR Show. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts.
Back when I was 12, I went to a private school, which was a bit far from the city center. This was in Zagreb, Croatia, so I had a lot of public transport options to get home. My usual routine was to get on the bus at the station in front of my school, all the way down to the main street, then take a tram to a public park and walk home the rest of the way. Our school had a double timetable where one week we went to school in the morning and the other week we had classes in the afternoon. This story happened during one of my afternoon weeks. I was walking out with a few classmates since we all got on the same bus to the main street. The rest of my classmates were picked up by their parents. When we got on the bus, there were a few empty seats, and I took a seat in front of a balding middle-aged man wearing slightly dirty clothes. That was a mistake. As soon as I sat down, he started staring at me, staring with a cold look in his eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, I took a book out of my bag and started reading. I would have used my phone if I could, but it was dead since I forgot to charge it before I left the house that day. The guy did not stop staring at me the whole bus ride, to the point I couldn't even concentrate on my book. But I refused to put it down because I was scared. I would have mentioned something to my classmates, but we were all spread out on the bus, and I was too scared to move. I don't know why, but I didn't want him to see that I was scared, thinking maybe that would deter him. When we finally got to our stop, my classmates and I all got off, and some of us headed to the tram station, while the others walked away to their houses. The guy who was staring at me also got off with us, and he started tailing us while keeping a fair distance. I told one of my friends about this, but urged him not to look back, thinking ignoring him would be the best option. When we got to the tram station, we all got on different trams since each of us had a different route. I needed to take tram number 2, and so did my friend Dario. We waited for it to arrive, and the guy was somewhere to our right, but we refused to look at him. When our tram arrived, Dario and I got on, but so did the creepy guy. When I arrived at my stop, I tried to quietly discuss with Dario if he should get off the tram with me just in case, but then we saw the guy leave the tram first and start heading into the park, the opposite direction of where I needed to go. He probably overheard us talking, since there were barely any people on the tram at that time. It was around 9 p.m., but I didn't think of that I thought it had all been a misunderstanding. I left by myself, and the tram sped away to the next station as I started walking home. It was a short distance and would have taken about 5 minutes, but then I noticed someone following me. I immediately knew it was the same guy again, so I picked up my pace as I headed to my apartment. As I turned a corner into the alley that housed my apartment, the guy was getting closer. I got to the building and buzzed my mom on the intercom. I wished she would hurry up, but in the end, the guy managed to catch up with me. I could smell the stench coming off him as he started talking. "Hey, how have you been, buddy? I saw your dad yesterday and he told me all about how you were getting on in that new school of yours," he said. I immediately knew he was lying, since my dad had been away on work-related business for months and hadn't returned home once in that time. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there, quietly staring at him. Just then, the door buzzed and unlocked, so I bolted for it. I rushed in and started running up the stairs, but he was following close behind me. Never in my life have I felt such an adrenaline rush as I ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor. I had a backpack with books weighing me down, so I had a disadvantage. But in the end, I managed to arrive at our door, where my mom was happily waiting for me. With no warning, I shoved her away from the door as I entered before slamming it shut. Fortunately, the guy had enough common sense not to knock on our door. I told my mom what happened, and she called the police, and they arrived sometime later, questioning me on how the guy looked and what exactly happened. In the end, they looked at the camera footage, but since it was so dark out and I didn't turn on the indoor building lights as I entered, they weren't able to get a clear view of his face. For 2 weeks, I was too scared to go home alone, so my mom picked me up every time. Then one night, we were watching the news, and it was reported that a man was arrested for the attempted kidnapping and assault of children. The face they showed was the exact one I saw that night. So I finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I was safe for now. I was never again careless enough to not charge my phone, as there are still many bad people in the world. Everyone, please stay safe out there.
Our final story is narrated by Kyra Cornett from r/True Scary Stories. It sat at the foot of my bed.
In early March of 2022, I was putting something away in my parents' room when I had a sudden feeling of dread. My dad was in there taking a nap, and I felt the need to pray over him. I did so and asked God to protect him. Later that night, I had a weird dream. In my dream, I had just finished washing and drying my bed sheets. I was attempting to straighten the bed sheet out by holding the ends and lifting it up and down. I did that multiple times until it landed on a human form sitting at the end of my bed. Obviously, I was freaked out and quickly snatched the bed sheet off in fear. I was met with a pale, pasty creature with sunken eyes. It was thin and frail. I could see its ribs through its skin. Its mouth was sewn shut, and it struggled to breathe through its bony nose. I had tried to pray it away, and it glared at me with its haggard eyes until I eventually awakened. My heart was beating out of my chest, and that feeling of dread returned. The next day, my dad wasn't feeling well, so I advised him to stay home, as I felt something was wrong. He's stubborn, though, so he went to work anyway. He returned home after work and went to bed early without eating. The man loves food, so him not eating isn't normal. The next morning, he said his back and stomach were hurting badly. I told him to go to the hospital right away, as I had a bad feeling. The dream kept coming back to my mind, and the thing I saw looked like a physical representation of sickness to me. After some convincing, he went to the trauma hospital around the corner. Thank God he went, because he had experienced an aortic dissection. An aortic dissection is deadly if not treated in a timely manner. It's a tear in the inner layer of the body's main artery. One basically bleeds out inside, depriving the vital organs of oxygen and blood flow. My best friend had one, and he had a less than 5% survival rate, as he bled out for 3 days before surgery. He survived, which is nearly a medical miracle, due to staying by his side almost the whole time he was hospitalized, which was over 100 days. I'm well versed in the condition, surgeries, and long recovery period. My dad was blessed, as his aortic dissection was found much earlier than my friend's. His surgery was long, but successful. He only stayed in the hospital for the month of March. His surgeon said his recovery was the fastest he'd ever witnessed. It was a terrifying situation. That thing I saw in my dream was a warning, I guess. A very, very creepy warning.
Want more Disturbed? Check out our Patreon for member-exclusive content, early merch access, and other cool perks. I'm your host, Doug Bailey, and this has been Disturbed, a production of Killer Podcasts and part of the Evergreen Network. For more paranormal and true crime shows, visit killerpodcasts.com. Follow our social channels at Disturbed Podcast on Instagram or Disturbed_pod on Twitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and reviewing on your favorite listening platform. Share your own true horror story at disturbedpodcast.com. Music by Epidemic Sound and by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Our producer is Elizabeth Flood. Our sound designer and audio engineer is Nathan Corson. Executive producers Bridget Coyne and Noah Fouts. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Hello, we have this superb podcast called We Didn't Start the Fire, the only podcast started by Billy Joel.
It is the most original, fascinating, and random way to learn the story of the 20th century.
Oh, pretty darned random. And we are joined by some pretty incredible guests.
I only wrote stuff that I wanted to hear. If it turned out to be a hit, it was pure dumb luck.
With me, Katie Puckrick.
And me, Tom Fordyce.
This is We Didn't Start the Fire, the only podcast started by me, Billy Joel.